Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, more trash. So, as you hopefully know, we've got a major reading event coming up in August, Garb August, a month devoted to reading trashy books. I put up a video on that last week, what is trash, talking about my definition of trashy books, and there were some really interesting comments on that video, which made me think about some things that I probably hadn't said that I should have said. So I had done a video previously a couple of months ago about why I love trash books, which really lays out what for me are the delights of trash, and I touched on that a bit in the what is trash video, but perhaps not as much as I could have done. So yeah, there was some really interesting comments, particularly one from Tornado Creator, and it came from the page. Did a fantastic kind of response video as well. So I wanted to pick up on some of the things that made me think about, those comments and that video made me think about. And also I had a really good email conversation with another subscriber, Dave Brzeski, about this topic as well. So it's given me some more thoughts on it, which are some of which are thoughts I've had in the past and expressed in a video I did a while ago about why I love trash, but I thought it was worth just going over those things again, and starting a broad that broader conversation about trashy literature. So I think one of the things that I probably didn't make as clear in last week's video as I could have done is this question of intent. So one of the things I said was that one of my main definitions or main criteria for what makes a trashy book is, why has the book been published? And if a book has been published mainly to cash in on public interest for something, be that a type of book, or be that something that's happening in the world, or something that people are talking about a lot in in the public space, then that can be a strong indicator of trashiness. And I hold by that statement. I think trashy books are often books that publishers have pushed out in order to make a quick buck off something. So, books that were about killer sharks in the wake of Jaws being published, is a really good example of that. So there were loads of books about sharks and whales and things like that after Jaws came out. And indeed, I would argue that whilst Jaws, which is by Peter Benchley, I would say isn't a trashy book particularly. I think it's a pretty good book. Not that good or bad is an indicator of trash either, but I think it has. I think partly because it was the first of its kind, it doesn't count as trash. But I think that pretty much all of Peter Benchley's other books that he wrote after that, where he writes about like other sharks or giant squids or things like that, I think those are trash. Because I think that's an interesting kind of trash in that it is Peter Benchley and his publishers cashing in on the success of Jaws, with a sequence of similar books that none of which had the power of Jaws. But yes, so I think there is a real distinction that is important for us to make between the intent of the publisher and the intent of the writer. And clearly, often, writers of trashy books would, are writing them in order to make money. So I had a good example of that recently pointed out to me by Dave Brzeski, which is Stephen Gallagher, who's an author I think I've talked about on the channel before, who writes horror novels. And I'm a big fan of many of his horror novels. So he's still writing now, but he was particularly big in like the 80s and 90s. Dave Brzeski, in a comment on Discord, I think, pointed out that Steve Gallagher also wrote the Kids from Fame books under the pseudonym Lisa Todd. So I was a really big fan of the Kids from Fame TV show when I was growing up. It was essential viewing in our household. I loved the music. I loved all the characters. So when I found out that an author I really like had actually written a couple of Kids from Fame novels, I immediately went on eBay. This one has arrived, book one, I haven't got yet. But I think, clearly when Stephen Gallagher wrote this book, he was writing it to make some money, to make a quick buck, and as I say, I'm a huge admirer of his, and I have no problem with writers writing books quickly to make money. We've all got bills to pay, whether we are writers or not. And I suspect that when he wrote this book, and if I'm wrong, I apologise. I suspect when he wrote this book, he was essentially writing it to a formula and was not too concerned about artistic integrity in the same way that he is with his horror books. So I think his horror books are very good, generally, and that there is an artistry to them and an understanding of the genre and things like that, which means they are not trash. But this, I think, is trash. But clearly, you can get writers who are putting their heart and soul into a book that a publisher is pumping out as trash, and it came from the page. Gave some really good examples of that, particularly there's some books there's a series of Aliens books, so books set in the Aliens universe, and he pointed out how there are a number of those books that discuss things like gender and sexuality in a really interesting way, and where clearly the writer is trying to do something more than just write an entertaining book set in the Aliens universe, and it turns out they are also very entertaining, and play well with the Aliens universe. But the fact they've got this extra something, I think, is really, really interesting. I don't think it stops them being trash, but I think for me, and I think I have said this before, for me the best sort of book or film is a book that looks like trash, and arguably is trash, a book or film, but has a real has some more depth to it, some political statement, some additional artistry and things like that you really notice as a reader. I think in the film world, there are many more obvious great examples of that than there are in horror. Than there are in books. So George A. Romero, I think is a great example of a director who was making films which which Hollywood and the critics regarded as would have regarded as trash. Night of the Living Dead, when it came out, was a very low budget zombie movie, but which have definitely have something more in them. I think Larry Cohen, the director, is another really good example of that. So I think some of his films, like Q the Winged Serpent, have so much fantastic stuff in them, that they go beyond trash. They are wonderful. Russ Meyer is another really good example. So his films are definitely trash, but they're brilliant. So I think there's for me, that's the perfect work of art, is a work of art that has been produced within the realms of the trash sphere, but is something more. But I don't think it stops them being trash. And I think that's the wonderful kind of contradiction of trash, is that trash can be brilliant. Trash books, trash movies can be fantastic. And it came from the page, talked really passionately and interestingly about like the Godzilla films, the original Japanese Godzilla films, and how much interesting commentary they had, how much effort and artistry went into the special effects and things like that. So definitely watch his video. I will link to it. So yeah, that for me is the perfect work of art. It's something that looks like trash, but is actually brilliant. And I really wanted to come back in a response, I suppose, to my own video of last week, and say that and make it clear that for me, trash is not a criticism. So it sounds like a criticism. It sounds like we are saying that these books are bad, but we're not. For me, trash, using that term trash, is about reclaiming these books from the critics who are saying they are terrible, because there is something to enjoy in all of these books, and many of them are not wonderful. Some of them will be downright bad, but they are still works of art in their own right. Even if they're derivative, even if they're based on something else, even if they've just been churned out by the publisher to make money, even if the writer has written them in a weekend, with a hangover because he's got bills to pay, it doesn't stop them being individual works of art that can have an impact on individual readers. And I've discovered this, I've talked on the channel before about the fact that I've written, I've self-published a few things in the past. And I had one series of books which became much more popular than I expected. So most of the stuff I wrote was crime and horror. But I also wrote a series of short stories about a cat. And so told from the perspective of a cat, which were kind of crime stories, but told from the cat's perspective. And the first one I wrote as a joke, basically, because people were saying to me that I wasn't writing, that all the stuff I wrote was horrible. So I thought, I'll write something about a cat. But the stories, that story quickly became much more popular than anything else I'd written. So I churned out more, to make money. I wrote more stories, but I really enjoyed writing them, and readers loved them. They were far more popular, as I say, than anything else I read. And I had some really lovely reviews on Amazon and Goodreads from readers saying that the books had really affected them. So I wrote them as quick, throwaway, enjoyable pieces of fiction, deliberately writing them to cash in on the success of the first book. And yet they still resonated with some people. And every book will do that. There is no book, I firmly believe this, there is no book, how trashy it may look to someone who's not into that kind of thing, that will not have had an impact on at least one reader. I think that's the wonderful power of fiction. And non-fiction as well, but particularly fiction. I think there's something about stories, even if they're derivative, even if the characters are two-dimensional, where, for the right person, that book will resonate. And that's as true of trash as it is of literature. I think with literature there may be more people, but partly that's because literature gets talked about by the critics more, so more people read it. And people read it with the expectation that it will have an impact on them. I think that for me is one of the differences between literature and trash, is the stuff that's branded as literature, we are told it is good for us to read it, and it will positively influence our lives. It will make us better people. We will become better people by reading a book. Whereas trash, we read purely for entertainment, and we are told that it's rubbish. Yeah, but it's not. It's still a book, and it is just as likely. And not just as likely. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but as I say, there will be people who are, who really get something out of all of these books, no matter how trashy they may be. So yes, that's a bit more of a ramble on the subject of trash. I really wanted to come back and address some of the things, some of the comments and things like that, and the further discussions that happened since the last video. So yeah, do let me know what you think. Do you think trash has value in the same way that I do? It's easy to talk about it, and I think I probably came across a bit too dismissively in last week's video, perhaps. But I do genuinely love these books, and I think there is often real value to them that gets hidden, behind the fact that they are, books that were quickly churned out to cash in on the success of a cheesy TV show about a group of students at the New York High School for the Performing Arts. And if you've never seen The Kids from Fame, I think I much prefer the TV show to the film. The film's fine, but the TV show is wonderful. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. So yeah, do let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.